Up, you want me to do introductions, Jonathan?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Sue.
Okay, so last month you guys, there was actually probably 2 or 3 people that had questions when we brought up Cohesity. And so we thought we'd go straight to the Cohesity team, Jerry Pezzino and his architect, Matthew, and let them get on and give you a little bit of information and also answer questions. I've actually known Jerry for years, and I'll let them introduce himself, but he was a Boeing employee at one point in time. So you've got people with different roles on the Boeing side, Jerry and Matthew, but we've been doing just some updates, just started really doing updates every month for them on anything that was storage related that they had questions on. And so this is kind of the monthly time for that. So thanks for joining, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves specifically, how long you've been there, what you did at Boeing, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, happy to.
The floor's yours, Jerry.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, so my name is Jerry Pezzino. I've been with Cohesity 5 years, basically since the product came out. For my first day here was the day that they had signed their first customer. And so I've been here for about 5 years. I'm responsible for what we call Pacific Northwest major accounts. Boeing is one of them. There's a few others. Matt and I were primarily responsible for about 10 accounts. Now, yeah, like Sue mentioned, I'm a former Boeing SSG employee, or at least what was formerly known as Shared Services Group. Back in 2003 through 2007. I came on as a EMC resident, and then decided to stay because, you know, very enamored with the mission, and I'm a big aviation guy, so I wanted to stick around. So I worked under a guy named Steve Haas. I think Steve's still somewhere in the organization, hasn't quite retired yet, but I was there for a number of years. Worked with folks like Chum Sanborn, Kevin Johnson. I think a couple of those have been on this call from time to time as well. So since then, I went to, I was at IBM for a very short cup of coffee, and then a couple other organizations, and then now at Cohesity for the past 5 years. So I appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, hopefully we can give you a little bit of insight in what we're doing over here and what we're hoping to accomplish for customers. So Matt, if you want to say hello as well.
Yeah, hi, Matt Taylor. I'm the systems engineer partnered with Jerry. I've been with Cohesity a little bit over a year. And before that, I spent some time in the channel, sort of doing infrastructure architect work for a channel partner. And then before that, I spent about a decade at NetApp. A fair amount of that was done in the Midwest, where I did a similar role to Jerry's residency at one of the major accounts that's based out of the Minneapolis area. So I'm excited to meet you all. I haven't worked with Boeing before, but I'm excited to meet you and learn all about the roles that you have.
So before we get started in presentation, is there anything, Brad, Malin, Damien, Algernon, that you want to specifically see, or should we just do kind of a start with the Cohesity overview and you guys guide us where it goes?
I was going to do an intro too as well, Sue.
Okay. All right, cool. I'll let you do that.
Yeah, I think I need the overview, so I think that's a good starting point.
Okay.
Cool. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts before we start, so we can guide the conversation? No go? Okay, all good. I did want to start with just talking about a couple things, just so that we understand kind of the relationship between Cohesity and HPE. Let me share my screen here. Bing. And is that coming through okay for you guys? This is an eye chart and a half. The idea here is that HPE actually has a very in-depth strategy when it comes to storage. There's a lot of different products that we work with, some of which are our own intellectual property, many of which are not. And when it really comes down to it, HPE's strategy around storage is around optimizing for workloads, as opposed to building Swiss Army knives and trying to attack everything with a product or 2 products or 3 products. We really feel like it's best to integrate and to find best in class that can do particular workloads the best way. And so you can see the way that this is all broken out is there's a lot of different pieces, right? There's lots of different kinds of workloads, lots of different use cases for storage. Specifically, if we wanted to drill down into, if it'll let me, there we go. If we wanted to drill down and we just want to talk about primary workloads, this is a zoom in on the same data that was on that previous slide, where there's We've got things like business intelligence, general purpose type workloads, analytics, and then edge analytics, which are going to be a little different than that, right? Especially from a storage standpoint, and even high performance compute type of solutions. So depending on what those are, then there's different ways of approaching that technology wise. There's block storage solutions, which are all these ones we've got listed over here on the left, hyper-converged solutions, file, right? Obviously, object, and then there's distributed type file and edge file, as well as particular solutions that are specifically at machine learning and AI type of solutions. And then beneath those, we can see these are the people that HPE works with. Some of them are HPE, like all of these block storage solutions. Some of them, though, are partners that we work with, which would be like Cohesity. And we can see in the block storage area, we work with people like Daterra. We even work with vSAN and Nutanix, so VMware. From a file standpoint and an object standpoint, Scality and Cumulo and Cetera. We see Cohesity is right here, kind of overlaps some of those things. There's multiple use cases that Cohesity has. And this is just on primary workloads. There's also secondary workloads and backup and data protection as well. But I just wanted to kind of bring it a focus that when it comes to HPE, there are a lot of different ways that we can take care of issues. And that's kind of our strategy, right? Is we want to take best in class. We want to make sure that we're focused on workloads and not just our own IP, and then partnering with the best people so that we can get the best solutions. Here's a list of what we call our complete partners. Those partners basically that we can sell on HPE paper. And you can see there's a whole bunch of different ones that are listed in here. Once though we've worked with a partner for a long period of time and invested in them, and we've got a lot of integration even from a technology standpoint, at that point in time, we start moving and we move to an OEM relationship. And an OEM relationship is a relationship we have with Cohesity. So that's one of the reasons we brought them in today. Also, we know that when we're talking about workload optimized, some of the things that people were asking about the last time we met, Cohesity was a very good fit for those. So with that being said, or I guess I should say, are there any questions about HPE's strategy around storage? Does that all make sense? Cool. Okay, well, that's all. That's all I wanted to say. I just kind of wanted to lay some groundwork on, you know, why are we bringing in another company, right, to talk to you? And really because we look at ourselves as, you know, as one team working together in order to solve, you know, problems for our customers. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will turn the time over to Jerry, Matt, who's, there we go.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, and again, I mean, most of what we're going to talk about is going to be in the SKU of HP hardware. And so, how do we align with, you know, some of Boeing's already defined standards in terms of HP Reliant and rack-mount servers and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit about what the product is, where we come from, and so forth, and then, you know, we can kind of tie that back to the HP brand as appropriate as well. So. Again, a little bit of introduction. The company was founded in 2013. Our founder came out of Nutanix. He was one of the 3 co-founders there. He was also a very early Google employee. He was one of the first 100 employees at Google and helped develop the Google file system, which is a lot of kind of the bare principles of what we're doing in Cohesity as well, in terms of a scalable web scale kind of file system that has a lot of the data features and data services that we need to be successful as well. Product came out of stealth late 2015. That's when I joined. The team that have come over, I mean, you name the kind of large legacy providers. We have a lot of folks from Veritas, a lot of folks from Dell EMC, VMware, Google, Nutanix, NetApp, and so forth that have kind of made our executive board and our organization. In the past 12 months, you know, about 70% of our customers, or 70% of our revenue is out of enterprise customers, and we'll talk a little bit about who those are. Just a little over 2,000 customers now in the first basically 5 years, just coming on our 5th year of general availability, and over 2,000 customers. That would outpace quite a few of our peers in terms of technology. In terms of investors, not that everybody cares, but HP is currently an investor, as is a few other organizations. Sequoia, the largest VC in the world, was our launch VC, as well as SoftBank, Google Ventures, and now recently an investment made by AWS as well. So in terms of organizations, we don't show the NASCAR slide here just to kind of, but we do show it because we'd like to be able to demonstrate the kind of scale that we're deployed in. Government and DoD is a big part of our business. We just service as well as the actual U.S. as well, running Cohesity. In terms of financial services, again, organizations that would be as mission critical as Boeing, JP Morgan Chase is our largest global customer. We're also very pleased that Matt and I cover the second largest U.S. customer in the world, and that is T-Mobile, that has about 27 petabytes of Cohesity deployed in their environment today. And so, not to just show off all the logos and all the pretty pictures, but also to kind of demonstrate the size and scale of our customers that would be similar to the type of stuff that Boeing has globally. But it's also important to note that a lot of customers kind of start where you might be starting, which is we have some kind of remote offices. We've got some kind of, what we used to call when I was there, dark sites, where we have some smaller configurations deployed out at the edges. And, certainly we have customers that start their deployment with Cohesity there and then adopt that in other organizations as it makes sense. So what are we setting out to do? So when the company was started, what was the mission that was set out to achieve? After he had left Nutanix, what was the mission that we set out to try to solve for customers? And the issue is what IDC now calls mass data fragmentation, which is a lot of data centers, a lot of different silos of equipment in those data centers, and then copy processes and business processes that don't take advantage of the efficiencies of the underlying systems. Because of that, you create another term that IDC calls dark data, which is copies of data that exist in the environment that is basically unaware to the administrator or the actual data analyst. And so the picture we kind of show here is really just, hello, Felix, thanks for joining. The problem we try to—
Hey, Felix, sorry, are you still sharing, Jerry? Yeah, you are, okay, good.
The problem we are seeking out to solve really is around this concept of fragmentation, which is, can we provide something based on a foundation that can help us analyze and store more than one type of workload? And that's really the issue we see in the environments that we serve today, is you've got these different data centers, you've got these remote offices, and now with the advent of public cloud, we have all of the public cloud providers as well, your Azures, your AWSs, and so forth. And now we've got things like data protection solutions, backup and recovery, whether that be at a core data center or whether that be at the edge. You've got target storage platforms along with those, things like your data domains and your isolons and so forth. You've got file and object, your isolons, your NetApps, your Scaladies and so forth, basically providing that file and object capability around the environment. And then on top of that, with the advent of public cloud, the ability to provide a gateway between those services, between the on-premises data and the actual public cloud workloads that are running as well. And so all these can be considered as these in disparate silos where data exists in more than one location. And so what our core foundation of the product is the ability to consolidate all of these workloads into a single namespace and a single environment. So things like data protection, file services, like I believe was one of the primary causes for this conversation, was things like file and object storage, as well as test and dev workloads, as well as the public cloud. And so when we look at the architecture of what Cohesity offers, the base architecture is a file system that we've created called SpanFS. And effectively what this file system is the ability to provide a single namespace for all of those different workloads that then share the concept of deduplication, compression, encryption, the ability to tier data through lifecycle management into a public cloud and so forth. So this file system built from the ground up, or not using any off the shelf, or not using kind of open source stuff. We're really kind of built this with a purpose in mind to be able to take advantage of disparate hardware, disparate different types of SKUs, different type of densities, and then the ability to grow that and scale that, like I mentioned earlier, into the multi-petabyte type organizations as necessary. So it's not uncommon to have a customer start with 50 terabytes of Cohesity and now today be well over several petabytes as they've grown their workloads and the data they consider to be appropriate for us over time. And so again, the bare functionality of Cohesity is this file system, and then there's the applications and workloads that sit on top of this file system that we've built from the ground up. We also have the concept of a single UI. So whether you use our product for file services, for multi-protocol file services, for object storage, for a copy data management solution, or from a data protection solution perspective, we're talking a single UI a single interface for all of that management, the ability to do multi-tenancy so that you can give backup functionality to one group of organization of users, or provide file services to another organization, but still have that central management functionality, and then have the ability to do global search and global compliance across all of that data, whether we're talking 5 data centers, whether we're talking multiple data centers and 3 clouds, whether we're talking all of that together, still have a single interface to be able to do global search and global indexing across all of that data, whether that be backup data, file data, across the entire global environment. And that's what Helios provides. On top of that, when we consider the type of breadth we're talking about with our solution, the ability for customers to do more than one thing with the product, whether that be backup, file, copy data management, what if it were possible to actually have a set of applications or a marketplace of applications that could then leverage that one consolidated view of all of that data? So a good example of this is leveraging something like Splunk, being able to do data aggregation and log management and reporting management off of that data, or being able to do things like compliance searching. I want to make sure that in my file environment or in my object environment, I have no PII data. I've got no data that that contains publicly identifiable information, or includes social security numbers or credit card numbers. I want to be able to search through all that data on a regular basis, not just file names and not just checksums, but actual regular expressions inside of that unencrypted text to be able to look for things I know will get me in trouble from a compliance or a search perspective. Those are all the types of different workloads and apps that we provide as part of our marketplace that allows us to then leverage the data that has been stored on the underlying Cohesity platform. And so when you look at kind of the holistic view of what we're doing, it is at its core a file system. And so we can do file system like things, file shares, Active Directory integrated file, multi-particle NFS file, the ability to have an S3 API object store as well. We can do all of those things, but then on top of that, the ability to do native data protection, whether we're backing up ourselves or backing up a VM environment or a bare metal AIX system or a SQL database or an Oracle database or a Mongo database. So those are all different things that we can really leverage with the technology. I know we're on Zoom and I'm on video, but at the same time, if there are questions, please do interrupt, because it's always hard in this format to be able to tell if somebody's asking a question. So where do customers really start that journey with us? The first one is really around the concept, where do most customers start with this? They start with one of 2 workloads with us. The first one is native data protection, which is the ability to protect external assets, whether that, again, be a virtual machine, a database, a bare metal system, a underlying application, SAP, Office 365, a EC2 VM in Amazon, or an Azure VM in Azure. So really that native protection includes the more traditional data protection algorithm of, hey, I'm going to provide you with an insurance policy or a copy of that data in case something goes wrong. But then above and beyond that, also the ability to look at that data and understand that data for indexing and search, but then also for things like ransomware protection, for malware detection, antivirus, and so forth. So the ability to not just protect the data like folks have been doing for 30 years, but also the ability to do some additional things with that data. Once we have it, what if we took the responsibility out of your hands to do Nessus scans? What if we could take the responsibility out to be able to understand whether you've been ransomware because we see a heuristic change in the underlying data, or a change rate that is abnormal, and being able to report that to you. So data protection, this workload is really at its core the ability to provide copies of that underlying data, but then also what can we do with that data once we have it? And that's really where we set ourselves apart from others. See, there was a chat, maybe that was a question.
That was Matt.
That was me just
And
offering
he'll
to
answer questions.
as well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Very good. I'm verbose. I apologize. So in terms of the data protection perspective at all, I won't bother wasting your time on this slide. Just know that if there's an application out there, generally speaking, from a data protection perspective, we have you covered. Whether we're backing up, again, an Oracle environment, an Exchange, a Mongo, a Cassandra, Kubernetes, being able to protect underlying storage arrays, being able to protect hypervisors. So just know that our breadth is not to be trifled with there. Pretty much any workload that a customer has, we can help. The second most popular workload, or really the second workload that is our most popular, would be the file and object services capability. Again, at our core, we are a file system that we built from zero. And with that, we have the ability to provide this web scale NAS functionality as well. True multi-protocol support, whether that be SMB, whether that be NFS, whether that be the S3 API for object. Maybe you have a situation where you want to encompass that data via SMB, but you want a view of that to be via the S3 API for object. We can do that. Cross-volume deduplication and compression. We do a variable deduplication, kind of a sliding window deduplication and compression that really helps with our efficiency. But then being able to give you that cross-volume deduplication and compression across data types. So if you're using us for data protection, we dedupe that. If you're using us for file, we dedupe that also with that same algorithm. And then the same thing with object. If you have, we're really the only solution out there that will deduplicate multi-protocol file and object in the same bucket of data as well. So just some additional efficiencies to be gained there as well. I mentioned the search functionality. So whether you're looking for, I need to search for a VM I need to recover, or I need to search for a file or folder that I need to roll back to a previous point in time because it was ransomware, all of that is available via our UI. So the ability to do indexing globally across, I don't have to think about what folder, what filer was that on, what VM was that on, which data center was that in, or was that in the public cloud, or was that in the on-premises data center? You don't have to think about any of that. It all is built into the single global search with our Helios product.
So a quick question, what versions of SMB do you support? I know there's been some issues we've seen with particular versions and signing of SMB packets.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, we do 2, 2.1, and 3. We don't do anything with 1. There's too many vulnerabilities in that one. We don't do any SMB 1, but we do support 2, 2.1, and 3.
Great, thanks.
The other thing that's important to know here is investment protection and heterogeneous tiering. So the ability to take data, perhaps you're in a position where I've got a very large NAS, or maybe I have a relatively small NAS, but it's also an idle NAS. I've got 100 terabytes, but only about 10 of it's really active. The rest of it just kind of sits around, is not being used. Wouldn't it be nice to kind of archive that or tier that off to something else? And that's certainly something we can do as well. We can tier off to our own high density platform. We can tier off to another on-premises platform you may already have, or we can archive and tier to the public cloud as well, using a product we have called Cloud Tier, which is the ability to actually take cold blocks of data and move them into to another platform. So the ability to kind of just keep and right size my active NAS environment for the volume of data I actually need to maintain and access on a regular basis. The other part that's interesting about that is the ability to do migration online and in place. So for example, you like what you hear today and you decide to invest in Cohesity and you buy a platform that you decide to keep for 4 or 5 years. And then it becomes end of life and fully deprecated, and you decide, hey, I'm going to go move to the new Cohesity. Well, you bring in those new nodes, you evacuate the old nodes, and that's a completely online activity for us. So code upgrades, capacity additions, capacity replacements, all completely online to the file system. And then the third piece really around public cloud, and again, I know Boeing kind of dabbles in this in some areas. Maybe this is not your primary area of focus, but just know that there's a bunch of different cloud workloads that we support, whether that's archiving or creating a copy of that filer or that file system out to the cloud because I want an archive in the cloud, being able to actually fail over active file systems into AWS or Azure as well, being able to, like I mentioned, to tier those file systems as well, or those copies of those backups, all fully capable with the platform. The fourth thing is really around, we talked about the concept of fragmentation because I have a Oracle database or a SQL database that I need to create copies of periodically, and then that gets used by a dev organization or a test organization. Typically, again, that's another copy of storage somewhere out in the environment, and then that can be rather inefficient. With our product, we effectively change that nomenclature just slightly, and we use the primary copy of data, we back that up, and then use that backup as the source for the test dev refreshes. And so with our product, that gives you the deduplicated copies for dev and test, for staging, for training, and so forth. And so the ability to use that backup as the source for how I refresh those test environments is a little different way of looking at it, but is a way to reduce those overall costs of having to maintain those separate environments. And then things like automated refresh and the ability to do every Monday, I refresh that database from prod. All those things are things that we can automate as well. We talked about the Helios functionality, again, the single UI and single global management. So whether I set a backup policy I want to be enforced globally, whether I set a filer in multiple locations, I want to be able to search through that data at the same time, all of that is based into our Helios product. So the ability to have global management and search is a core aspect of our product. And then again, we talked about the marketplace functionality, the ability to plug in apps, maybe something like what we call our Cohesity Spotlight app, which is I want to understand how data is being consumed and accessed in my file environment. I want to know who's consuming the data, who's accessing the data, who deleted the data, because now something super critical is gone. What happened? I want to absolutely know who affected that. And that can be what we do is in terms of the Spotlight application inside the marketplace. All the Cohesity applications, including things like our Runbook app to be able to do failover and automation, our Insight app, which can look inside of data for regular expression data, our Spotlight app, all those are free to use with a Cohesity customer. So it's not like we're saying, oh, use this app, here, let me get you a quote. That's not really the case. The same thing with our copy data management functionality, all of that stuff is built in. There's really two modes of how you acquire Cohesity. There is the backup mode, which is I care about your software and I actually can see that benefit and value of protecting other assets I have in my environment. Or I don't really care about any of that and I just want your filer, and that would be the other cost as well. So some customers like both, some customers want one, and to be fair, that is an option as well, the ability to just kind of use the functionality that you care about in your environment. The other functionality we recently released is called our Data Management as a Service platform. This is also available with the HPE SKUs as well. So we don't we let you continue to buy things the way you normally had. Things like backup as a service, the ability to protect both on-prem and cloud platforms, disaster recovery as a service, the ability to do file as a service, the ability to do CDM as a service as well. And so this is really just a subscription, automated, fully managed offering that we offer as part of Cohesity as well. This is really for folks, though, that have a very small amount of data, and I'm looking to kind of protect that. Or maybe I have a larger environment, but I just don't want to manage a backup environment. Those are the things that really compel customers to look at our as a service offering. It's really not for the consumption model because there's a bunch of great ways HP can do that already through like the GreenLake offering. So that's not a replacement for this. This is for the folks who say, I've got this small environment. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to worry about it. I want you to manage it. Those are all things that we offer as well. So I'll leave you with this. Again, I don't like PowerPointing people to death. I usually prefer conversations. But the 6 things we really kind of excel at, the scale out functionality is really our core, right? The ability to start small and expand over time, add additional nodes, add additional functionality as I expand my use of Cohesity over time. We don't make you pre-buy what you think you're going to use in 3 years. You can start small and then expand over time. Our global space efficiency, again, across all those different filers, across all those different object stores, the ability to be able to provide that deduplication compression functionality. The search, which is the ability to find the data I need to manipulate or potentially apply policy to or potentially search through for compliance. If you're using our backup functionality, or even if you're not, if you're just using our filer capability, the ability to recover that filer to a previous point in time instantly is a core tenet of the functionality as well. We talked about the app functionality, and then we also talked about kind of the ransomware detection and antivirus capability that's all built into the product as well. So I'll pause there. Any questions, comments, anything that we can answer? Oh, I see. Yeah, Sue. I mean, so in terms of dark sites, certainly with our DoD environments, I mean, certainly the Helios functionality, we have an on-premises version. Typically, Helios is deployed as a SaaS offering, but even my largest customer, T-Mobile, they don't prefer that. They prefer an on-premises version of that, so we can do that. Also the ability to do AS256 encryption, the ability to do support without replacing actual hardware. So don't send us back if you have to drill the hardware or the hard disk. That's certainly something we support as well. And that's of course something you would get through HPE anyways. And then the ability to kind of do an all-encompassing environment where there's no support out externally. There's nobody that can connect to the device. It's completely isolated and self-terminating. Those are all things that with our DoD business we're very accustomed to. The other thing to keep in mind in terms of the encryption is that we are FIPS certified as well. We had to do that for DoD, and so we're not just compliant like many folks like to say. We actually went through the full certification. So if you look at the FIPS website, you'll actually see the Cohesity SpanFS file system as part of that as well. So we've gone through all the trouble of getting all the certifications that we know our defense customers need. So I'll pause there, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Hey, Jerry, it's Damien. Quick question for you, or actually a couple questions. So how does the deployment look like? So I know is it software based or is it hardware based or is it a combination of both? So let's say I have a small site, I want to get Cohesity. What do I need to get in order to get it, up and running? And then also, if you were protecting, let's say, multiple servers, is there like an agent that you deploy to those servers, or how do you protect? Or not protect, but how do you ingest that data from those different various endpoints?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I'll answer the first one first. So Cohesity has a couple different models available through the HPE OEM, right? They have the actual hardware-driven solution, which is a node-based, physical node-based solution. We have the Apollo platform, which is basically a 2U 4-node enclosure, and there's various different sizes and flavors of those. We also support Reliant hardware as well, which is effectively the 1U or 2U, or even in some cases 4U nodes as well, depending on densities. And so there's a variety of different densities all the way down to, we actually have a robo solution that's as small as 4 terabytes, all the way up to the large 4,000 Apollos that can be up to 700 terabytes per node as well. And so just depending on that, there's that offering. That's going to ensure the best experience because we have a certain ratio of flash and hard drives, and it's really just an all-encompassing appliance in that mode. The software-only mode is effectively deployed as a virtual appliance. So for smaller environments, we also support what we call the Cohesity Virtual Edition, which is deployed as a OVA somewhere in a VMware environment or a Hyper-V environment as well, out there somewhere in a customer's environment, and then that would function then as the underlying backup appliance or the file appliance as well. The challenge with that is that we really can't guarantee the experience because it's all dependent on what you're providing to us in terms of hardware or in terms of the underlying disk. And so both are available. It depends on scale and size and of course budget of where you would need to get to. So that's how we deploy. The second question of how do you protect and how do you ingest the data? If it's a virtual, if it's a hypervisor, for example, whether that be Hyper-V, Nutanix AHV, or VMware, those are agentless solutions in that they talk native APIs, they pull the data over those APIs, and then ingest that data into our system. So you don't necessarily, if it's a VMware environment, for example, you don't need any agents, you don't need any software installed. We effectively use the VADP infrastructure to be able to pull that data across. If it's a bare metal system, a Windows server, AIX server, a Linux server, there are agents available to pull those out of part of our UI. There's a agent page. You just hit download. You pull the RPM out or the EXE out, and then it deploys on that underlying agent. We don't charge per agent. We don't charge per system or per VM or anything like that. It's effectively if the amount of capacity that you acquire. And so if you say, hey, we're going to back up 50 terabytes of VMs, well, then we'll apply some math to that. We do, we have a pretty good idea in a VMware environment or a Hyper-V environment what we would do in terms of deduplication and compression. We would then sell you that capacity, and then it's as much data we can have, as many systems as we can back up to be able to fill that capacity. So there's no worry about, hey, I just added a server or I just added a VM. I have to be able to license that. That's not the case with our solution.
Yeah, and the critical point there is that it's post-dedupe and compression storage consumed on our side for that license. So if you are getting very, very good dedupe and compression ratios and can fit more servers onto the cluster, that's benefit to you. We're not charging on front side terabytes, with the one exception of the as a service offering. The as a service offering does charge that way. But for the modes of deployment that are most common in our customers, either through hardware or software, and the other point there being is that we are just the software in this relationship. So we qualify platforms that are effective to run the software on. Jerry detailed the ones that we have with HP that work very well. And in the virtual environment, we just wrap that in an OVA and install it as a virtual machine. But fundamentally, our value is the software. There's no particular hook or unique hardware or secret sauce on the hardware side that we need in order to derive that value.
Hopefully that helped.
When you said the capacity, you talk about the physical capacity of that appliance, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
gotcha.
So if you have 100 terabytes on the front side of servers and it gets deduped and compressed down to say 40, we're charging you for the 40. And so we, as part of our sizing operation, we apply our historical knowledge on what typical dedupe and compression rates are. But if we were to dig in deeper, we would definitely want to work with you and say, this is where your mileage may vary a little bit on how efficiently things are going to dedupe and compress. Certainly there are known data types out there which don't dedupe and compress well that we would want to know about and make sure we factored into the sizing.
Right. And then another question, when it comes to the integration with the cloud providers, does Cohesity charge you, I guess I'll call it like a toll, right? Where it's moving the data from your on-premise to the cloud storage platform. Obviously the cloud provider is going to charge you a fee, but is Cohesity charging that toll for that, 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, whatever passes through the platform?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like, let's say for example, we're backing up a 5 terabyte infrastructure, and then we're creating a copy using our cloud archive functionality to push that 5 terabyte, because we're going to keep it on-prem for 14 days, and we're going to send it to Azure, and it's going to live in Azure for 90 days. Or for a longer period of time based on
right.
So with that mode, there is a cloud archive license, but for most customers, what we end up doing is what we call an unlimited cloud archive, which is they would affect it, unless they're saying, hey, I've got 100 terabytes, I only need to send 1 terabyte to the cloud. Well, then we would license that 1 terabyte. There's no reason to do unlimited if they only have a very limited amount of use in the cloud. But for customers who are saying, hey, the public cloud is going to be a big part of my long-term retention strategy, then we leverage the unlimited archive license, which means that there's no metering of that usage into Azure AWS.
But if we were just moving, let's say let's say we have an S3 object storage on premise, and then we're just moving data from that location to the cloud. I know you're talking about the archiving, but that's not necessarily, it wouldn't, in that scenario, wouldn't be archiving. You're essentially just moving data from one storage, so S3 storage, right, onto like, let's say AWS or GCP or Azure. And
you're doing that, like, let's say you're doing that yourself through your application. You have some that's on-prem, and then you're going to move some to some S3 object in AWS, and that's just
right.
Yeah, we don't charge for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we're the engine that's applying policy to that data to then move that data into AWS, yeah, there's a license for us for cloud tiering, for example. But if you're the one doing it and you're just using, I've got 3 different S3 repositories. One of them just happens to be on premise with Cohesity. Then no, we wouldn't be aware of it. Therefore, we wouldn't care what you do with it.
Okay.
Yeah. And if we're just providing the data storage platform, but you're doing the data movement, then that just uses our base data platform license. The base license of the cluster covers all of that functionality. So things like dumping databases via RMAN fall into that category. Bringing just an S3 bucket falls into that category. There's being the repository, say, for replication from other Cohesity clusters. So talking back to the question about remote sites, if you have small deployed remote sites and you're replicating those to a central repository, you would have licensing for the engine out at the remote site that's doing the backing up, but the replication to a central, say, fan-in location, that cluster doesn't need to be licensed again. We would only need that as a replication target license.
Make sense?
Yes, I think that's all I have for right now.
Very good.
I kind of had a follow-up question. When we're talking about scale, What are the increments, or how does scale work if you want to go faster or get bigger?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of go faster, let's talk about that, right? So there's a bunch of different types of nodes under the HP banner as well. We have all flash nodes. We have what we call our hybrid nodes, which are a potential, a percentage of flash with a larger amount of high density disk. The only rule that we have for a namespace, which is a cluster, what we call it, and generally a cluster is limited to a data center. And so multiple physical locations would require multiple clusters. But the only rule that we have for a cluster is a minimum of 3 nodes. And so depending on where we are size-wise, after we do all of our math and figure out how much you would need, there was a 3-node minimum. From there, it's a 1-node increment going forward. And so if we decide we're going to start with 12 terabyte nodes, and there'd be 3 of those, that'd be 36 terabytes raw. After we apply erasure coding to that, call it 66% or 24 terabytes of capacity, of usable capacity. And then after that, we apply deduplication and compression to that as well. And if you were to add additional nodes at that point, it's just 1 node at a time. Same thing if we're adding newer nodes and evacuating the old nodes, 1 node at a time. Yeah. So there's no, like I said, I've got and I have customers who have 100 node clusters in a data center, and we're talking multiple petabytes in a single namespace, and that's not a problem.
So in general, the nodes fall into sort of the physical nodes, exempting the software-only deployments for a moment, fall into basically 3 different categories. We have very fast all flash nodes. We have general purpose nodes that are in that sort of 36 terabytes ish. There's plus or minus.
We're at the high density nodes. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, and then we have a third class, which is the very large high density nodes. So thinking back to that fan-in architecture again, where you have lots of remote sites fanning into a central location, you might want to use high density nodes for that because they're not doing a lot of client-facing front-side workload. They're just accepting internal, accepting replications, and they have the best cost per terabyte and the most rack density available to them. So they fall into broadly those 3 buckets. Now, today, those would need to be in separate clusters, but as we move forward with our engineering, we're actually going to be able to incorporate those together and bring those tiers of service together into one manageable cluster that offers sort of the best of all of those worlds to the appropriate sets of workloads without needing separate installs. Jerry's 100% correct. Each of those could be added onto 1 node at a time. And then in some situations, the actual data protect licensing that we do where we are the engine is on a per terabyte basis. So those could actually scale independently. If part of the cluster is being used as a data target and doesn't need data protect licensing and it needs to grow nodes, those new nodes don't have to grow with the same licensing proportion as the original.
Yes. Yeah, it's important to know that, right? It's a valid point, which is if you decide to use us for data protection and file, it's not like you're paying for the full capacity for data protection. You would pay for only the capacity used for that function. Likewise, if you just happen to be, one of our Boeing customers, formerly known as CDG, they have multiple data centers and they replicate across multiple environments. And so in their case, they only pay for the protection licensing on the primary copy of data, not on the secondary. They actually replicate to 2 different environments. And so for that environment, they don't have to pay for licensing multiple times. They pay only for that 1 terabyte, that first terabyte of data protected. They don't pay for it for replicas, which is also a differentiator.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things, right? That we give you a bunch of data and answer questions, but then most times, folks will sign off and, hey, I wonder if that'd be a fit for this, or if I want to be a fit for that. So, I mean, certainly Sue will send our contact information, I'm sure, and I'm sure Jonathan will as well. So if there's questions or follow-ons, or maybe if you'd like to see UI and do a demo, those are all great things that we'd be more than happy to do if there's an interest.
Yeah. And from that position as well, for all you folks at Boeing, pinging Sue and I about Cohesity or any of our partner solutions is just fine. We'll answer whatever questions we can, and we'll bring in specialists. But if it's just a matter of brainstorming, there's a particular use case that you're curious about, ask us the question, and we'll see what we can do. One of the beautiful things about this is you guys already use HPE servers, and this is just software that runs on those same type of nodes that you're already running in your environments. So from an infrastructure standpoint, hardware-wise, right, everything on the lower layers, it's the same gear that you've been using and that you're used to, and it's standard and approved in your environments.
So on those physical nodes, those nodes need to be dedicated for this solution, right? So it's not like you layer it and parcel off some storage, like say you've got a Linux server and you want to parcel off some of the storage for the solution. It's for the whole node, right? It takes over the node.
That's correct.
That's great. We actually image the nodes from the ground up, right? So
Okay.
they're not running. It's not like a virtual machine running on top of another OS, right? When we take those nodes, we take a specific SKU that we've worked out with HPE, which has a specific BOM associated with it for those node types. They are, say, in the case of a DL380, it is a DL380, but it has a specific loadout of cards and memory, et cetera, right, that we expect, and then we actually image that in. And it will ship with that image. Actually, that's part of the OEM relationship.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So you've got basically your own like appliance image that applies to the nodes that are in use.
That's good.
Yeah.
We're not adding anything that you couldn't have put together yourself through an HP BOM, but it is a specific loadout that we've asked for.
Right.
Yeah, there's a difference between software defined, right, and bring your own hardware.
Yeah.
And sometimes we think of software defined as bring your own hardware, but in this case, we have set specs to make sure that we can meet the SLAs associated with the platform.
Right.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I appreciate you taking the time with us.
I got a couple more questions.
Thank you.
So for the, I know you mentioned for different protocols you guys support, like SMB, NFS, and S3. So when you present though that I guess we configure those 3 protocols, so all 3 different, I guess, systems you can write to. So I could have a client write to S3 and then have another client write an SMB to the same file.
Yeah.
Is
So
that possible?
the only limitation at the moment is if you do have multi-protocol and you have SMB and NFS read-write, the S3 API actually wouldn't be able to discover it wouldn't be able to write in the mode that the SMB and the NFS clients would actually accept. And so SMB can be read-write, NFS can be read-write in multi-protocol, but S3 can be only read-only in that mode.
Okay, I see. Okay.
And that's not really a Cohesity limitation, it's more of an S3 API limitation.
Right. And then the other question I had was, how does Cohesity deal with applying metadata, like at the data source? Is it able to integrate with other systems and like pull, metadata and apply it as it goes up the chain?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Like
So
give me an example.
So let's say we have, like this, I guess, a small site, and we're getting data from, a machine, and there's certain values or metadata, that we're applying to it on a local S3, or actually, they're applying the metadata, and then sending the data over to either GCP or AWS or Azure. How does Cohesity deal with the metadata? Is it able to apply it in flight, or is there any component that's supported to apply metadata?
I think we would function just as an S3 service, right? So you could apply metadata through the exact same methodologies you're using now. So
yeah, let's say if you're writing just via the S3 API, we acknowledge and apply all of the different variables in the API. So if one of those just happens to be applying metadata and then moving that data to another store, we would comply with that as part of the API.
Right, and if we were to move on and do data protection and say we protected that at the remote site using an S3 bucket configured on that remote cluster, and then protected that and replicated it to another place, whether that be central repository or GCP, whatever, that's going to be maintained. The metadata is just going to be replicated as is to that other location. So any metadata applied will survive that transfer.
But is Cohesity able to help with the actual metadata tagging?
Well, it's a standard S3 bucket. So all the metadata tagging is going to use the S3 API. And then that metadata will be associated with the object inside the store. And so in that case, it's at that point in time, your metadata is completely separate from your file system. So Cohesity doesn't have to do that. By offering S3, that's what allows that capability to happen.
And I will add as well that we do have a full developer kit available to us and a full set of automation options too. So if you wanted to do some post-processing against that, you could do that via an external API driven process, that would just act on the data that was stored inside our S3 buckets.
Yeah, I think that's more what I was looking for then. Okay, I gotcha.
Any other questions? Well, Jonathan, Sue, thanks for hosting us, and appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on. Any follow? So we recorded this specifically because Jose